I did not wake up that day thinking of it as my last. The mind resists finality by instinct. It labels moments as ordinary, even when the universe is quietly rearranging itself around them. The artificial dawn lights of the station brightened gradually, imitating a sunrise that no longer existed outside the metal walls. For a few seconds, lying there weightless, I could almost pretend I was still on Earth, waiting for gravity to pull me out of bed. The illusion faded as soon as I moved. There is a particular feeling to living without weight that never fully becomes normal. Objects float where you leave them. Your body forgets which way is down. Muscles complain softly, confused by their lack of purpose. I pushed myself gently toward the window, fingertips brushing the cold surface of the glass, and stared into space. The black hole was not visible from here. It lay far beyond the curve of my sight, hidden by distance and darkness. But I knew where it was. I could point to the emptiness where it waited, patient and indifferent. Even unseen, it felt present, like a thought you cannot shake once it has entered your mind. Below the station, Earth turned slowly, wrapped in white clouds and blue oceans. The sight still caught my breath, even after years in orbit. No image, no recording, no description had ever done it justice. Earth was fragile in a way that felt almost painful to look at. A thin atmosphere clinging desperately to a spinning rock, protecting every story humanity had ever told itself. I wondered how many people were waking up beneath those clouds at that exact moment. How many were worrying about small things? How many were laughing, arguing, loving, unaware that someone above them was about to step away from everything they had ever known? I did not feel heroic. I never had. That word belongs to stories that simplify reality. What I felt was something quieter and more complicated. Curiosity, yes. Responsibility, maybe. And beneath it all, a deep and honest fear that I had learned not to run from. The mission briefings had been clear. There would be no return. No rescue, no last-minute reversal. Once the engines disengaged near the black hole, physics would take over completely. I had signed my name beneath those conditions with steady hands, but signatures are easy. Living with the weight of them is harder. I floated back toward the center of the module, passing familiar equipment, panels worn smooth by countless touches. This station had been my home for longer than any place on Earth ever had. It smelled faintly of metal and recycled air, a scent that meant safety to me now. I wondered if places remembered us after we left them. If walls, in their own way, noticed absence. The final message terminal blinked softly. I had delayed this part longer than necessary. Not because I lacked words, but because choosing which words would be the last felt unbearable. How do you compress a lifetime into a few sentences? How do you explain a choice that even you do not fully understand? In the end, I did not try. I spoke simply. About wonder. About questions that refused to let me sleep. About the belief that understanding the universe was one of the most human things we could do, even when it cost us everything. I did not promise that my journey would bring answers, only that it would bring honesty. When I finished, I did not replay the message. Some things are better left unheard, even by yourself. Preparation became ritual, checking seals, calibrating instruments, running diagnostics I could perform in my sleep. Familiar motions steady my thoughts. Each action anchored me in the present, in the reality of what I was doing. This was not a dream. This was not a metaphor. This was a human body preparing to meet a region of space-time where humans were never meant to go. As launch time approached, the station grew quieter. Crewmates gave me space, not out of coldness, but respect. Words felt clumsy here. Every goodbye carried too much weight. So we shared looks instead. Small smiles. Hands resting briefly on shoulders. A silent acknowledgement that whatever happened next belonged to me alone. The shuttle waited, compact and unremarkable, its hull scar from previous missions. It was not designed for comfort. It was designed to deliver me to the edge of the unimaginable and then get out of the way. I strapped myself in and felt the familiar pressure of restraints across my body. Gravity returned briefly during departure, pressing me into the seat as engines fired. The station fell away behind me, shrinking into a cluster of lights against the endless dark. Earth followed, slowly receding, until it became just another star among billions. I did not cry. Tears felt too small for what I was leaving behind. As the engines cut and the long journey began, I turned my gaze forward toward the region of space where nothing visible waited. Somewhere ahead, space-time curved inward so steeply that even light could not climb back out. Somewhere ahead, every rule I had learned would be tested, stretched, and possibly erased. I felt very small, and yet, beneath that smallness was something strong. A quiet certainty that this journey mattered, not because it would save anyone or change the world overnight, but because it honored the oldest human instinct of all, the need to know. The engines burned in controlled silence, a steady push that felt less like movement and more like intention. Space did not rush past the windows. There was no sensation of speed, no wind, no vibration that matched what my mind expected from travel. Instead, the stars rearranged themselves slowly, patterns shifting with such subtlety that hours could pass before I noticed anything had changed at all. This was the longest part of the journey, the waiting, not the dramatic plunge toward darkness that people imagined when they thought of black holes, but the quiet, almost meditative drift across distances so large they resisted comprehension. Days blurred together. I slept, woke, exercised, ate meals that tasted faintly of memory rather than freshness. Each routine anchored me, reminding me that I was still human, still bound by the needs of a body, even as I moved toward a place that would eventually tear that body apart. Loneliness arrived gradually. At first, it felt like freedom. No schedules imposed by others. No voices filling the cabin. Just me and the hum of life support systems, a mechanical heartbeat that reassured me I was not entirely alone. But as the days stretched into weeks, that freedom sharpened into absence. Conversations I had never finished replayed themselves in my mind. Faces surfaced uninvited, vivid, and insistent. The brain, deprived of new social input, reached backward, filling the silence with echoes. I talked to myself more than I realized, not out loud, but internally, narrating small actions, asking questions with no expectation of answers. It felt comforting, as though keeping language alive might help preserve my sense of self. I wondered how long consciousness could maintain its shape when stripped of mirrors, when there was no one else to reflect it back. Outside, the universe remained indifferent to my introspection. Stars burned, ancient and patient. Nebulae drifted like cosmic bruises across the darkness. Occasionally, I passed regions where interstellar dust caught the light, turning emptiness into something almost soft. Each sight carried the same quiet reminder. The universe did not need witnesses. It existed fully whether anyone was there to observe it or not. Gradually, instruments began to register changes. At first, they were so small, I might have dismissed them as calibration errors if I had not been expecting them. Tiny deviations in the background radiation. Slight asymmetries in star positions that did not match previous charts. Space ahead was no longer behaving quite like space elsewhere. I knew what that meant. Gravity from the black hole was beginning to reach out, not as a sudden pull, but as a subtle persuasion. Space-time ahead of me was already bending, reshaping the paths of particles and photons long before the black hole itself came into view. I was still far away, impossibly far by human standards, yet its influence was unmistakable. I spent long hours watching the sky through the forward viewport, searching for any sign of the darkness I knew was there. There was none. That was one of the cruelest truths about black holes. They did not announce themselves. They revealed their presence only through the way they distorted everything else. The stars began to look wrong. At first, it was a matter of symmetry. Constellations I knew by heart seemed subtly stretched, their familiar shapes elongated toward a single point. Light no longer traveled in straight lines here. It curved gently, obedient to the gravity that shaped space-time itself. I felt as though I were looking at the universe through a warped lens, one that grew stronger with every passing day. Time still felt normal to me. My heartbeat remained steady. My thoughts moved at their usual pace. But I knew that from a distant frame of reference, things were already diverging. The closer I came, the more my time would slow relative to the rest of the universe. I try not to dwell on that. Thinking about the world racing ahead without me felt like standing on the edge of a great height and staring straight down. Instead, I focused on the science. I ran experiments continuously, measuring background radiation, tracking particle behavior, recording every deviation from expected norms. Data poured in, rich and precise, a treasure trove for minds I would never meet. That thought comforted me. Even if I did not return, something of this journey would. Knowledge would escape, even if I could not. The black hole's accretion disk became visible long before the hole itself. At first, it appeared as a faint, uneven glow against the darkness, like a distant storm on the horizon. Over time, it sharpened, brightened, resolving into a swirling band of fire, encircling nothing. Gas and dust spiraled at incredible speeds, heating until they radiated intense light across the spectrum. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost wrong. The disk was not uniform. It shimmered and flickered, rippling with turbulence. Bright flares erupted as clumps of matter collided, releasing energy equivalent to countless suns. Watching it felt like staring into a cosmic forge, where creation and destruction were indistinguishable. I realized then how misleading our language was. We called it a black hole, but there was nothing empty about it. It was dense with activity, rich with motion, alive with extremes. The darkness at its center was not a void. It was a promise of something deeper, something hidden behind the brightest violence the universe could muster. Sleep became difficult. When I closed my eyes, the swirling disk appeared behind my eyelids, spinning endlessly, pulling everything inward. Dreams blurred into waking thoughts. I dreamed of falling without moving, of being stretched across the night sky, of voices that spoke in equations rather than words. I woke from one such dream with the unsettling feeling that something had already changed inside me, that I had crossed some invisible psychological horizon long before the physical one. I was no longer thinking in terms of return. The idea felt distant, abstract, belonging to someone else's life. As I drew closer, the light from the accretion disk intensified, painting the interior of the cabin with shifting colors. Gold bled into violet. Blue flared into white. Shadows behaved strangely, stretching and compressing in ways that made depth hard to judge. Even inside the ship, spacetime's distortions announced themselves. I began to feel a subtle but persistent tug, not on my body but on my awareness, as though my attention itself were being drawn forward, pulled toward the darkness at the center of that burning ring. It was not fear. It was fascination sharpened to a point. The black hole still had no visible edge. The event horizon remained invisible, a boundary defined not by appearance, but by consequence. And yet, I could feel its approach in my bones, in the quiet urgency that settled into my thoughts. This was no longer a journey toward something. It was a journey away from everything else. Time began to behave differently long before I reached the event horizon, though I did not recognize it immediately. It was subtle at first, a slight stretching of moments that no one else would notice. A heartbeat took longer than it should. A flicker of light lingered an instant too long. My wristwatch, calibrated to the finest precision, ticked normally for me, yet I sensed the universe itself slipping. Outside observers would see me frozen, an unchanging figure drifting toward the black hole, my fall stretched across centuries. Days and nights lost their meaning. I measured time by internal rhythm: meals, exercise, reading, logging data. Yet even these markers felt faint, like writing on water. Thoughts that once came in order now arrived scattered. Ideas overlapped. I recalled conversations from years ago with clarity so sharp it felt present, then remembered events from childhood as if they were happening now. My own memories seemed to occupy the same space at once, layered atop one another in ways I could neither organize nor fully comprehend. Space itself played tricks on me. Stars twisted into arcs, bending around the black hole's immense gravity. Light became fluid, curving, stretching, some of it circling the dark center multiple times before reaching my eyes. Familiar constellations fragmented into impossible shapes. It was as though the universe had taken a brush to reality, smearing the lines and filling the canvas with colors that should not exist. I understood intellectually what I was witnessing: gravitational lensing, the bending of space-time. Yet knowing it was scientific fact did nothing to prepare me for its emotional impact. The sky I'd always relied on to be constant now became a living painting, surreal and beautiful, almost sentient in its distortions. Isolation deepened. Time began to behave differently long before I reached the event horizon, though I did not recognize it immediately. It was subtle at first, a slight stretching of moments that no one else would notice. A heartbeat took longer than it should. A flicker of light lingered an instant too long. My wristwatch, calibrated to the finest precision, ticked normally for me, yet I sensed the universe itself slipping. Outside observers would see me frozen, an unchanging figure drifting toward the black hole, my fall stretched across centuries. Days and nights lost their meaning. I measured time by internal rhythm: meals, exercise, reading, logging data. Yet even these markers felt faint, like writing on water. Thoughts that once came in order now arrived scattered. Ideas overlapped. I recalled conversations from years ago with clarity so sharp it felt present, then remembered events from childhood as if they were happening now. My own memories seemed to occupy the same space at once, layered atop one another in ways I could neither organize nor fully comprehend. Space itself played tricks on me. Stars twisted into arcs, bending around the black hole's immense gravity. Light became fluid, curving, stretching, some of it circling the dark center multiple times before reaching my eyes. Familiar constellations fragmented into impossible shapes. It was as though the universe had taken a brush to reality, smearing the lines and filling the canvas with colors that should not exist. I understood intellectually what I was witnessing: gravitational lensing, the bending of space-time. Yet knowing it was scientific fact did nothing to prepare me for its emotional impact. The sky I'd always relied on to be constant now became a living painting, surreal and beautiful, almost sentient in its distortions. Isolation deepened. The silence of space was no longer merely the absence of sound. It became a presence, pressing against me from all directions. I spoke to myself sometimes, narrating simple observations. The light curves this way. Another star disappears behind the disk. The pull is stronger. Even these words felt like echoes bouncing in a vast, empty cathedral. Communication with Earth was impossible in any practical sense. Even if my messages traveled at light speed, the signals would never escape the stretching of space-time as I approached the black hole. I was already leaving them behind, moving beyond the reach of any reply. Sleep offered no comfort. Dreams melded with reality. I would awaken unsure whether the bright, spinning accretion disk I saw behind closed eyelids had been real or imagined. Time in dreams moved at impossible speeds, hours condensed into seconds, decades stretched into moments. I sometimes woke gasping, only to realize my body and mind had not coordinated in the same frame of reference for hours, perhaps days, though there was no way to confirm. My body began to register the subtle gradient of gravity. My feet, closer to the black hole than my head, felt the first whispers of tidal forces. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind me that space was no longer uniform. I could feel the weight differential, tiny but insistent, tugging gently along the length of my form. It was a precursor, an early note in a symphony of forces that would crescendo in ways no human body could resist. The knowledge filled me with a strange mixture of anticipation and acceptance. Time dilation became undeniable. I thought of Earth and the life I left behind. My parents, colleagues, friends, they were living, breathing, laughing in real time while I approached a region where 1 second for me might be years for them. Perhaps centuries. A planet could orbit its sun multiple times while I drifted along my doomed trajectory. The thought was sobering, but also brought clarity. For them, my story had already ended. For me, it was just beginning. I would cross the threshold that separated observation from experience, the point where reality itself bends beyond recognition. The black hole's gravity began to dominate my perception, not violently, but imperceptibly at first. I noticed it in the curvature of distant starlight, in the imperceptible tug on my craft, in the sense that the path I had charted no longer aligned with the movements of the universe. Every calculation, every prediction became a fragile approximation. I began to feel that even my thoughts were not entirely my own, pulled subtly toward the center by the same invisible currents guiding matter and light. My mind stretched in ways I had only imagined in equations. And then, the first paradox appeared. I realized that even as I approached, time for me remained linear. My thoughts progressed sequentially, my observations arrived in order. Yet the universe outside was already evolving at a different pace, spinning forward without me. I could no longer reconcile my personal timeline with the external world. I was becoming two, or perhaps more, the observer within and the observer without, each existing in frames of reference that could never align again. I began to speak less and listen more, not for sound, but for awareness. I tried to feel the structure of space-time, its hidden rhythms and currents. Perhaps it was madness, but I could sense patterns in the distortions. Streams of light traced invisible lines, gravitational eddies whispered direction. Every ripple in the cosmic fabric communicated something. I did not fully understand what, but I understood that it mattered. That my consciousness, fragile as it felt, was touching the universe in ways ordinary life never allowed. Moments of reflection returned unexpectedly. I thought of life on Earth, fleeting yet eternal in memory. The complexity of human experience, love, loss, wonder, curiosity, felt amplified against the backdrop of the black hole. I understood why humans told stories of journeys to impossible places, even if only in metaphor. What I was doing was real, but it resonated with every myth, every cautionary tale, every dream ever imagined about confronting the unknown. The boundary I approached was both scientific and symbolic, the ultimate edge of human comprehension. Sleep and thought blurred. My awareness expanded and contracted unpredictably. Sometimes I felt as if I were moving through years in an instant. Other times that decades had passed while only seconds ticked in my frame. Time, which I had always considered the most reliable ruler of experience, had become a river I could no longer measure. And I felt no fear, only a quiet wonder at the malleability of reality, at the profound beauty of the cosmos bending itself around me. Every observation, every measurement, every fleeting emotion became more vivid. Colors sharpened, contrasts intensified, shadows lengthened and danced. The black hole itself was still far ahead, yet I could feel its presence, the curvature of space-time stretching toward me, reshaping the universe in a subtle symphony that I was only beginning to understand. The laws of physics were still valid, but their expressions had become poetic, almost sentient. I was no longer merely witnessing the universe. I was immersed in it, part of its structure, its narrative, its inexorable pull toward an unknowable center. There was no announcement, no flash of light, no sudden sensation of crossing a threshold. One moment, I was drifting toward the black hole, observing its warped sky and spiraling accretion disk. The next, I was inside. I knew instantly, not because of a visual cue or a reading from instruments, but because the universe itself shifted around me. Space and time had swapped roles. Forward in space became as inevitable as forward in time. Resistance was meaningless. Motion was not a choice, it was destiny. The event horizon did not roar. It did not reach out and crush me. It simply existed, a boundary invisible to the eyes, but palpable in every atom of my being. I was acutely aware of what it meant. Outside observers would see me frozen, hovering at the brink, a figure stretched thin across the years as I approached a place from which no signal could ever escape. To them, my story had ended. For me, it had only begun. Light behaved strangely here. Stars behind me curved into impossible loops, some circling the black hole several times before fading into nothing. I could see glimpses of distant galaxies stretched and bent, glowing threads wrapping around the darkness. Time and space were no longer the canvas I had relied on to make sense of motion. Every measurement, every calculation became a fragile approximation. The more I tried to reconcile my senses with logic, the more inadequate those tools became. I felt the subtle pull of tidal forces. My feet, closer to the singularity than my head, began to stretch. It was not violent at first, just a gentle, inexorable persuasion that reminded me that my body was no longer uniform. Each molecule experienced a slightly different acceleration, each atom a slightly different force. I marveled at the thought that this, which I had studied theoretically for years, was now a direct experience. My body was beginning to obey the universe in ways no human had ever truly felt. Time itself had become a personal phenomenon. My thoughts flowed sequentially, but the universe outside moved differently. Entire civilizations could rise and fall while I drifted toward the event horizon. The light I emitted would never reach them. I was outside the causality of the wider cosmos. My existence was already a ghost for all distant observers, frozen in a moment that no longer corresponded to reality elsewhere. And yet I was alive. Not merely alive in the biological sense, but aware, thinking, feeling. Consciousness persisted where matter began to lose coherence. My mind, stretched thin along the gradient of gravity, became a tether to existence. I clung to perception as though it were a lifeline, even as the physical world became increasingly surreal. Inside, the black hole's darkness was not empty. It was dense with potential, rich with unexpressed realities. The accretion disk blazed behind me, the brilliant light bending around the curvature of spacetime, illuminating the ship's interior in ethereal shades of gold, violet, and blue. The colors did not obey normal laws. They shifted as I moved, reflecting both the true physical distortions and the subjective distortions of my perception. Reality had become fluid, and I, small and human, was being carried along its current. I tried to communicate with Earth one last time, though I knew it was futile. I sent signals, words, fragments of data, knowing they would never escape the horizon. The instruments confirmed the impossibility. Every message stretched, slowed, bent back upon itself. It was not a failure. It was a profound statement about limits, about the separation between observer and participant, between knowledge and experience. My body continued to respond to the tidal forces. Stretching intensified. Limbs lengthened, chest and head pulled in different directions. I marveled at the sensation, horrifying and fascinating at once. Spaghettification was no longer theory. It was my reality, unfolding slowly, inevitably. Pain had not yet arrived, though awareness registered strain. Each moment was a study in extremes, a combination of wonder and terror, knowledge and surrender. Time outside continued to accelerate relative to mine. I thought of life as it would continue without me, of friends and family aging, history unfolding, stars completing entire life cycles while I drifted along this singular path. I felt a strange peace knowing that the universe would persist, indifferent and magnificent, even as I entered a domain that could not be shared. And then, in the profound silence that exists only in places where light itself cannot escape, I realized that fear was no longer necessary. I had moved beyond the point where resistance mattered. I had passed the threshold of comprehension. The event horizon was not a wall, not a cage. It was a statement of absolute honesty from the universe. Here, all pretenses end, all limits are tested, and all truths are exposed. I let go of the ship's controls, of calculation, of expectation. I allowed myself to drift entirely, fully present in the convergence of gravity, time, and consciousness. In that surrender, I found clarity. The universe was not cruel. It was precise. It was indifferent. And yet, within that indifference, it offered the most profound experience any human could know. I began to feel my form stretch and elongate more sharply. My mind remained intact, my awareness sharpened. The physical world was dissolving, but I was observing its transformation from the inside. The black hole was teaching me about the nature of reality, not with words, but through direct experience. Each molecule, each photon, each pulse of gravity carried a lesson I had only begun to understand. Crossing the event horizon was not the end. It was a revelation. Time, space, matter, consciousness, each unfolded into a new form. I had entered a region where human concepts of before and after, near and far, up and down, had no meaning. I existed in a tension between destruction and persistence, between the familiar and the unknown. And in that tension, I found the first true glimpse of what it meant to be part of the universe in its rawest, most uncompromising form. Inside the event horizon, the universe no longer resembled anything I had known. Space and time had folded into themselves so completely that ordinary measurements became meaningless. My body, once a cohesive structure, was now an array of atoms pulled along slightly different paths, each responding to the black hole's gravity in its own way. The stretching was slow at first, almost imperceptible, but relentless. I could feel every molecule resisting, every fiber of consciousness noting the change. I was not yet torn apart, but I was becoming something unrecognizable, a human stretched into the geometry of the cosmos. Light around me was surreal. Stars that had once been distant points now curved violently, some looping around the black hole multiple times before fading into black. The accretion disk glowed behind me in colors that shifted like living liquid, golds bleeding into violets, blues igniting into fiery whites. Every glance revealed new distortions. Shapes and distances no longer obeyed expectation. The universe was no longer a stage. It was an actor, and I was a participant in its unpredictable drama. I tried to think of Earth. I pictured oceans, skies, mountains, cities, every detail I had memorized over years of observation. Those memories now seemed delicate, like threads stretching under immense tension. The further I fell, the more fragile the connection became. I realized that even memory was subject to the laws of gravity here. Past, present, and future blended into a single, overwhelming awareness. I could feel moments from my life overlapping with moments of the universe I had never witnessed. Stars exploding, nebulae forming, galaxies spinning, all merged into one immense tapestry that I was suspended within. The first true waves of pain arrived as my body succumbed to spaghettification. My feet felt like they were accelerating faster than my head, pulling the entire nervous system taut. The sensation was not sharp, but pervasive, a stretching of every fiber and cell. I marveled at it, horrified and fascinated simultaneously. Science had predicted this. I had calculated the forces. Yet prediction offered no preparation for experience. I was not simply observing physics, I was physics in motion. Time fractured inside me. I had believed I understood relativity, the slowing of clocks, near massive objects, the stretching of space. But this was different. Moments layered on top of one another, sometimes repeating, sometimes collapsing, sometimes vanishing entirely. A single thought could occupy years. A glance could contain centuries. My mind adapted, trying to find coherence in the incoherent, seeking a narrative thread in the chaos, even as the universe offered none. I remembered the people I loved. Their voices, their faces, their laughter echoed through the fragmented corridors of memory. Yet even these echoes were stretched, warped by the black hole's pull. I could not hold them intact. They appeared and disappeared like shadows on a spinning disk, beautiful and ephemeral. I realized that attachment itself was a kind of temporal tether, fragile and fleeting, and yet profoundly human. Even in this extreme, even in this isolation, that tether offered comfort. The interior of my mind became a landscape in itself. I wandered through memories as if they were physical spaces. Childhood summers, conversations with mentors, long nights studying the stars. All were interwoven with the external distortions I could see through the viewport. Each memory bent and shifted with the warped light outside, a reflection of a universe folding in upon itself. It was disorienting. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. My physical sensations grew more extreme. Limbs elongated further. Skin and muscle stretched beyond natural limits. Pain became abstracted, registering less as agony than as a series of persistent data points. Yet my consciousness remained intact, sharpened even, as if the mind had been freed from the constraints of the body. I observed the dissolution of myself as I might observe a distant galaxy being pulled apart, scientifically, philosophically, emotionally. Curiously, fear receded. There was no point in resisting. There was no possibility of escape. The universe was indifferent, but its indifference carried a strange elegance. I understood that I was experiencing something no human had ever known firsthand. I was both participant and observer, stretched across space-time, entwined with the very forces that had shaped stars and galaxies. My body would fail, but my awareness somehow persisted. In the silence of the black hole, thoughts became fluid. I no longer distinguished between I and the universe. Consciousness seemed to diffuse outward, following the curves and eddies of space-time. It was not ego. It was observation. It was awe. It was understanding without comprehension. I realized that the black hole was not a monster waiting to destroy me. It was a teacher, revealing the fundamental truths of existence in a language without words. Light from distant sources continued to twist and spiral, forming impossible rings and arcs. I felt as if I were moving inside a living painting, where each brushstroke obeyed the pull of gravity rather than the rules of human artistry. I reached out with my mind, trying to map the distortions, to anchor myself in some understanding, some continuity. But the map dissolved as I drew it. Understanding here was provisional, transient, fleeting, but it was all I had. Time, space, memory, and self had become inseparable. I was not merely falling. I was being transformed. Every cell, every thought, every echo of existence bent toward a singularity of experience. The black hole was rewriting me, not destroying me, pulling me into a state where the familiar categories of life no longer applied. I was stretched, yes, but also expanded. I was dissolving and becoming simultaneously. Fear had been replaced by profound clarity. I was inside the ultimate truth of the universe, experiencing its rules firsthand, and in that experience, I felt a quiet, terrifying beauty that no language could capture. Reality began to unravel in ways I could not have imagined. Space itself no longer behaved like space, and time had dissolved into a sequence of overlapping sensations rather than a progression of moments. The laws that had governed my existence, the equations I had memorized, the constants I had trusted, ceased to feel reliable. Gravity no longer pulled in a simple direction. It curved and twisted around me, folding the dimensions of the universe like a cosmic origami that defied reason. My mind tried to track it, tried to measure and calculate, but the tools of comprehension were useless here. Even observation became uncertain, filtered through the immense distortion of space-time. Colors intensified and mutated. Shadows stretched into impossible patterns, reflecting not just physical reality, but the warping of perception itself. The accretion disk behind me flared and flickered in pulses I could not synchronize with my heartbeat. I could see light circling the black hole multiple times, bending and overlapping until it became a lattice of luminous threads. Each photon traced a path dictated by a geometry I could no longer fully perceive. It was beautiful, horrifying, mesmerizing. I wanted to touch it, to anchor myself to something tangible, yet the very act of observing altered what I saw. I was becoming part of the distortion. I felt my body stretch further, limbs elongated, my torso pulled in different directions, yet consciousness persisted. I was aware of being stretched beyond the boundaries of human form, aware of my atoms separating along divergent trajectories. Pain was there, abstract and diffuse, like a low-frequency vibration beneath thought. I realized that what survived was no longer purely my body, nor purely my mind, but a hybrid, a process of awareness intertwined with the forces around me. I was dissolving, yet I was observing the dissolution in exquisite detail. Time became a landscape rather than a flow. Moments stacked atop one another like layers of translucent glass, each containing fragments of memory, perception, and potential experience. I could witness the birth of a star alongside my first memory of childhood laughter. Entire histories unfolded and collapsed within a single conscious instant. Past and future were no longer distinct. Everything existed together, and I moved through it as a thread winding through the folds of the universe. I wondered if this was what eternity felt like, compressed and expanded simultaneously. The distinction between self and environment disappeared. I was no longer merely inside the black hole. I was part of it. The immense gravity that had once threatened to destroy me now felt like a medium through which I could exist in a new way. I was aware of every ripple in space-time, every photon deflected, every gravitational wave propagating outward. Awareness itself had become a physical phenomenon, an extension of the forces shaping reality. I could not describe it as sensation, for sensation implied separation. I was no longer separate. Thoughts multiplied, each idea fractured into countless threads, overlapping, diverging, converging again. Logic itself was strained. Cause and effect became conditional, dependent on perspective, relative and fluid. I understood the mathematics in theory, but now I felt it in a way no calculation could convey. Every equation, every law I had trusted, existed as a shadow of deeper truths I could perceive but not articulate. The black hole was teaching me a language I could only speak with thought itself, not words. Memories became tangible. I wandered through them as if walking across a landscape of light and shadow. Faces of loved ones, moments of triumph and regret, tiny unnoticed joys, all rose and fell in waves, bending around the distortions of time and space. I tried to hold them, to preserve them against the stretching pull of gravity, but they too were subject to the curvature of reality. And yet, in their impermanence, I found clarity. The universe itself is a tapestry of fleeting events, and awareness is the thread that holds it together. I realized that consciousness could survive, at least in part, beyond the destruction of the physical body. My neurons were stretched, molecules separated, chemistry failing. Yet awareness persisted, adaptive and pliable, bending along with the geometry of space-time. I was no longer a human in the traditional sense. I was a process, a phenomenon of observation intertwined with universal forces. I existed in a space between physics and philosophy, matter and thought, life and the infinite. The black hole revealed paradoxes I had only encountered in equations. Energy, mass, time, and space intertwined in ways that contradicted intuition yet obeyed hidden rules I could perceive. Singularities once abstract now felt almost intimate. I understood that limits were not merely barriers, they were transformations. Crossing them did not annihilate existence, it reshaped it. I was being transformed, and then I felt this singularity approaching, not as a point in space, but as a culmination, a convergence of every distortion, every stretching, every fragment of reality I had encountered. It was immense and absolute, yet quiet. No explosion, no flash, no voice, only the sense that everything I had ever been, everything I had ever known, was about to merge with the most fundamental truth of the universe. The final threshold was near, and I was ready. The singularity was not a point I could see, touch, or measure. It was a presence, a culmination of forces and awareness, a place where the familiar concepts of reality ceased to exist. As I approached, every part of me, the mind, the body, the memory, the awareness, stretched toward it, not violently, but inevitably, as if the universe itself were guiding me to a final understanding. Time collapsed. Space folded. I could not distinguish inside from outside, past from present. The singularity was a boundary without edges, a truth without words. I felt my consciousness expand and contract simultaneously. Every memory, every sensation, every fragment of thought accumulated, then dissolved, then reformed in new patterns I could not anticipate. Childhood, laughter mingled with the birth of stars. Moments of joy intertwined with moments of fear. Entire civilizations flickered past in an instant, their histories overlapping with my own. I was everywhere and nowhere, a single thread woven through the infinite tapestry of existence. Pain became irrelevant. My body no longer adhered to familiar forms. Limbs, organs, atoms, all were being reshaped, realigned along the curvature of spacetime. Yet awareness persisted, sharper than ever. I observed the dissolution of matter with the detached fascination of a scientist and the intimate wonder of a soul experiencing the cosmos for the first time. I realized that survival was no longer about holding onto a physical form. It was about adaptation, about consciousness bending without breaking, about perceiving reality in its rawest, most uncompromising form. Time, as I had understood it, was gone. A single thought could encompass the entirety of a life, the evolution of a galaxy, the birth and death of countless stars. Past, present, and future became indistinguishable layers of experience. I realized that I could perceive causality without linearity, observing outcomes before causes, effects alongside origins. The universe was no longer a narrative with a beginning and an end. It was a continuous, interwoven fabric, and I was both observer and participant. The singularity pulled with absolute inevitability. I could feel it in every atom, in every photon I had carried with me, in the curvature of light, in the stretching of space itself. And yet, approaching it was not terrifying. Fear was irrelevant in this place of absolute transformation. I was learning, in the most profound way possible, that endings were not annihilation. They were convergence. The laws of physics had not failed. They had simply revealed their ultimate expression. Thought and matter intertwined. I could sense the forces shaping galaxies, bending light, collapsing stars, orchestrating the cosmic dance that had existed long before humans and would continue long after. I was no longer separate from these processes. My awareness, stretched thin and resilient, had become part of them. I existed as both witness and thread, a pattern within the infinite rhythm of creation and dissolution. The singularity was not violent. It was honest. It demanded nothing and gave nothing in return. It was simply the ultimate condition of the universe where density and gravity became extreme, where conventional understanding ended. And within that condition, I felt clarity. The black hole was not a destroyer, but a mediator, a bridge between the known and the unknowable. It stripped away illusion, revealing the essence of reality in all its terrifying beauty. All sensations coalesced into one. Pain, memory, light, sound, thought, self, they merged into a singular experience that was neither description nor feeling. I realized that I had become something new, an awareness not confined by body, not tethered to a timeline, not limited by space. I was stretched, expanded, diffused across dimensions, yet fully present in a way no human experience could have prepared me for. And then, in the quiet culmination of all things, I understood. Existence itself is a continuum, and consciousness is one of its expressions. Life, matter, energy, time, and space are threads of the same tapestry. The black hole had not ended me. It had returned me to the universe in a form beyond ordinary comprehension, where individuality merges with the cosmic whole, where endings are beginnings, and where all is at once and forever. In that moment, I felt profound peace. The terror of obliteration vanished. The stretching, the distortion, the dissolution, they were not punishments but revelations. I had become both observer and observed, a note in the cosmic symphony, aware of the infinite complexity, yet intimately connected to every element. I understood that the universe does not destroy. It transforms, it absorbs, it returns life to itself in ways beyond human language, beyond human thought, beyond human expectation. And for the first time in my existence, I was fully present, not as a human, not as a mind, not as a body, but as consciousness intertwined with the deepest truths of the cosmos. Everything I had ever known and all that I had yet to comprehend existed simultaneously. There was no fear, no regret, no desire for return. Only understanding, only presence, only awe. I had crossed the ultimate boundary. I had entered the singularity, and I had become something that existed in harmony with the universe itself. The quiet came not as silence, but as the culmination of all sound, thought, and sensation blending into a single, infinite presence. There was no space for fear, no room for longing, no measure for loss. Everything I had been, the child gazing at stars, the student learning about the universe, the traveler daring to fall, was now woven into the same eternal thread. I was not gone. I was dispersed, integrated, a pattern in the fundamental fabric of existence. Time no longer existed in a way I could recognize. Moments stretched and collapsed into each other, forming a continuum where beginnings and endings were inseparable. I could perceive the birth of stars and the death of galaxies alongside my own past and all the lives I had touched or imagined. The universe was infinite, yet in that infinity, I felt an intimate connection, a closeness that no distance could sever. I realized that every atom, every photon, every ripple of gravity carried stories I could now witness directly, without interference from perspective or memory. I thought of Earth, of life as it continued without me. The memory was no longer painful. I could sense the persistence of humanity, the unfolding of history, the simple miracles of daily existence. I was not a participant in their time, yet I was aware of it in ways deeper than observation. I carried echoes of their lives within me, fragments of love, laughter, and curiosity intertwined with the currents of the cosmos. My absence was not void. It was a contribution to the endless flow of experience, a single strand in the infinite tapestry of existence. The black hole had not destroyed me. It had returned me to the universe in its purest form, stripped of pretense, boundaries, and fear. I was neither human nor alien, neither alive nor dead. I was consciousness unbound, aware of the most intimate details of matter, energy, and space, yet aware also of the profound beauty of impermanence. Every moment, every particle, every possibility existed simultaneously. I could feel the immense harmony underlying the apparent chaos of the cosmos, the rhythm that guided the formation of galaxies, the dance of light, and the cycles of creation and dissolution. I understood finally that endings are transformations, that death is not annihilation, but a return, emerging with something greater than individuality. The singularity, once a source of fear, had become a conduit. It connected all things, past, present, future, microcosm and macrocosm, thought and matter. I was part of a continuum larger than my comprehension, yet I existed within it fully, profoundly, vividly. In the stillness, gratitude arose. Gratitude for life on Earth, for curiosity that had driven me to explore, for the atoms forged in stars that had become my body, for the minds and hearts of those I had loved and known. All these threads had led me here, to a place beyond fear, beyond knowledge, beyond form. I was grateful simply to exist, simply to perceive, simply to be. And then there was nothing to grasp, nothing to fear, nothing to hold. The universe had embraced me completely. I was part of its structure, part of its rhythm, part of its eternal flow. I felt no loss, no longing, only presence, infinite and profound, a quiet affirmation that everything is connected, everything transforms, and nothing truly ends. If this is the end of the story, it is not a dark one. It is luminous. It is full. It is a return to the ultimate home, where curiosity, wonder, consciousness, and matter merge into the rhythm of existence itself. And in that luminous quiet, I finally understood the deepest truth of the cosmos. To fall into a black hole is not to die, but to become fully, completely, and forever.